Like the content you see? Support this channel on Patreon. Link in the description. From the Old Republic to the Galactic Empire, the Jedi Temple on Coruscant had a long history, and throughout its history its walls have been infiltrated and breached. In the Old Republic, Darth Malgus and his Sith Armada ransacked the Jedi Temple. During the rise of the Galactic Empire, Darth Vader and his clone army massacred all the Jedi within the temple. But on a smaller scale, there were two individuals who conducted covert missions into the temple. One was a bounty hunter named Cad Bane, the other, a fallen Jedi named Xanatos. There has also been a shared history between those who were Force-sensitive and those who were not. Whether it was the Palawa developing a fighting style specifically designed to fight Jedi, or the Mandalorians taking on Revan and his followers, or General Grievous, who was created as one of the greatest Jedi hunters, or more commonly, a bounty hunter using their arsenal against Sith and Jedi.
Cadbane at your service. I'll take on any job for the right price.
Cad Bane was born in the slums of New Tiana, a spaceport orbiting his homeworld of Duro. For much of his early life, he took on odd jobs and bounties, simply surviving in the slums. It soon became clear to Bane that this was the career path for him. But to be successful, he knew he had to make a name for himself. This being the case, one of his first professional jobs was a hit against a Jedi Knight. As it turned out, his target wasn't really a Jedi, but another freelancer simply playing as a Jedi by way of his equipment. Ankle-mounted jetpacks alluded to force jumps, and wrist-mounted magnetic grapples alluded to force pulls. After capturing this false Jedi, Cad Bane spared him under one condition. He could keep his life if he taught him how to build the tools he used. From that point on, Cad Bane became one of the most infamous bounty hunters in the galaxy, and like the greats before and after him, he worked on his own terms. Many of the bounty hunters of his time, like Bosch and Aurra Sing, were affiliated with the Bounty Hunters Guild, yet Bane never joined the group. Oftentimes he took targets in direct competition with the faction, which earned him a lot of heat, but also a notorious reputation. What's more, his newfound tools set him apart from most bounty hunters, specializing in killing Jedi. This reputation eventually secured the attention of the Dark Lord, Darth Sidious, who commissioned Bane to steal a holocron from the Jedi Temple in what will become his most infamous mission. The success of his mission earned him more and more work throughout the Clone Wars, always contracted by the highest bidder. And at the war's end, Bane's criminal reputation as a Jedi hunter turned from nefarious to honorable.
You destroyed everything I loved! You destroyed me that day, Qui-Gon. Yet I was reborn. Stronger. Wiser. I have surpassed you.
69 years before the Battle of Yavin, Xanatos was born to the planet Telos IV. His father Cryon was the richest man on his homeworld, taking power for himself through his wealth rather than his political prowess. Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn discovered Xanatos at the age of 3, but was reluctant to take the boy, changing his mind only after Cryon encouraged Xanatos' training, as he thought having a Jedi in the family would be very useful in the future. The Jedi counselors were also very wary of Xanatos and his training, sensing the innate dark side within him, and it wasn't long until their suspicions were realized. Years later, Qui-Gon and Xanatos returned to Telos IV as Master and Apprentice. Xanatos' homeworld was on the brink of civil war. Qui-Gon and his colleague Tal uncovered that the conflict was instigated by Xanatos' father. Despite this, Xanatos sided with his father, and after watching him being killed by Jinn, he fell to the dark side, swearing vengeance against his former master. For years, Xanatos bided his time, building his own empire through his private corporation, Offworld. The fallen Jedi sought more and more power wherever he went, whether through policy or monetary gain. He finally revealed himself on the planet Bondamir, where he attempted to extort their valuable mines. On Coruscant, he infiltrated the Jedi Temple, looking for crystalline vertexes to keep his company afloat. And on Telos IV, he attempted to take his father's place as the reigning leader. But Qui-Gon Jinn and his new apprentice, Obi-Wan Kenobi, would be there to stop him every time. Ultimately, they cornered him on Telos IV, where Xanatos took his own life, falling into a pit of acid. For this video, I will be examining these characters as they appear in the Star Wars canon and Legends continuity. For Cad Bane, I will be examining him up until Season 4 of the Clone Wars, utilizing Legends material like the comics and short stories which do not conflict with the main canon. For Xanatos, I will be examining him up until Jedi Apprentice, The Day of Reckoning, but I will also be using material like the Dark Horse comic books and the Star Wars role-playing guide. Unlike Boba Fett, who was trained by his father, or Boschk, who was trained by the Bounty Hunters Guild, Cad Bane taught and trained himself. With this, I do not believe he was practiced in the ways of Tiras Kasi or any other non-Jedi martial art. However, he did display a skill with standard hand-to-hand combat, wherever he learned it from. That said, it's not likely that close quarters combat was his priority. Though he was not trained by the guild, it was common knowledge for a bounty hunter to engage their target at close range only as a last resort. Plus, as a Duros, he was not noted for his physical strength. Most Duros had an affinity for mathematics and space travel, rather than bounty hunting. With this in mind, Cad Bane's fistfights would likely include subversion, rather than strength, though he has been shown to be able to snap a human's neck. It's also worth noting Cad Bane's breathing tubes. No sources have stated the use of his breathing apparatus, but he is able to breathe without them. Therefore, it's likely he only uses it for harsh conditions, not because it was necessary for him to breathe, depending on where his missions took him. Xanatos, by contrast, was trained physically throughout his time in the Jedi Order. His training as a youngling would have been more about the Force and how to control it, but there were also frequent tournaments between the initiates, and their physical training was almost as important. This training included lightsaber combat, usually headed by Sin Dralid, or unarmed combat, typically led by the Jedi Master, nicknamed Iron Hand. This training would all be coupled with Xanatos' natural physicality. At the age of 25, Xanatos was at his species' physical prime. Qui-Gon Jinn noted his fallen apprentice for his economy of motion and his strength, and he was top of his class in his clan, packing power with his blade, fist, or foot. A testament of his strength can be seen in The Dark Rival, where Qui-Gon describes his strikes as sending shockwaves up his entire arm. What's more, Qui-Gon knew he could not tire his old apprentice, meaning that Xanatos had respectable levels of endurance. Despite that, during their first engagement, Xanatos was described as having sloppy footwork. His shoddy balance is not mentioned further within the series, implying he improved, but it is still worth mentioning. Even so, Xanatos was a lively fighter with strength and endurance to back up his speed and haste. As stated, a bounty hunter almost never engages in a physical contest, using their weapons and devices before even thinking of other options. In fact, the Bounty Hunter's Code describes that a member should retreat and reassess where possible. That's why we see so much success from bounty hunters who use some form of a jetpack. That being said, Cad Bane is outclassed in a physical regard. Xanatos has better training and has displayed a greater use of his physicality against other formidable opponents. Much like Bane's short fight with General Kenobi, it wouldn't last long. And that's not even mentioning Xanatos' ability to augment his physicality with the Force, enhancing his natural reflexes and his agility. It's really not a hard round to call. Xanatos gets the definitive edge for his physical abilities. Much like the bounty hunters of his time, Cad Bane carried a surplus of weapons and was outfitted with the most up-to-date equipment. For this analysis, I will only be observing his main set of weapons from the Clone Wars TV series. What we will do is list each and then elaborate on how they would be used in combat. First, and most notably, would be his pair of LL-30 Blastech pistols. Almost identical to Jango Fett and his pair of Wester 34 blasters, Cad Bane customized his signature weapons with expensive and durable alloy, which prevented his pistols from overheating. This enabled him to fire off more shots for a sustained amount of time. This supposedly will be beneficial when fighting against Jedi, as we see here. But the Bounty Hunter's Code also advises against this tactic, because one's blaster bolts could be reflected back at them. But when looking in canon, when Cad Bane unloaded on Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Master of Sarisu, the defensive form of the Jedi, or even Jango Fett, who has also fired against Kenobi years prior, the Jedi Master only managed to turn the blasters away, rather than successfully reflect them. That being the case, Cad Bane's weapon of choice seemed to be more helpful than not. As a secondary weapon, he used his wrist gauntlets, which were equipped with cable launchers, bolas, darts, and a gas flame projector, with the added benefit of becoming electrified. In particular, his cable launchers and bolas were very useful when subduing Jedi. We see both Jango and Boba Fett using their own set of cable launchers against Jedi effectively. To straighten this point, again, the Bounty Hunter's Code explicitly states this as one of the most valuable strategies against such enemies. But if this did not get the job done, he could fall back on his flamethrower or his electrified gloves. And if a Jedi were able to reflect his blaster bolts, he had the ability to switch to his darts, which, like a slug thrower, would merely melt or shatter when colliding with a lightsaber, rather than being redirected. And on top of that, he could even use gas to incapacitate his enemies. This was also noted by HK-47, who preferred using gas against Jedi to nullify their abilities. On the subject of HK-47, an assassin droid who was specialized in killing Jedi, he also recommended the use of explosives against such adversaries, as weapons with a large area of effect were generally successful against Jedi, and Cad Bane made good use of thermal detonators where he could. But perhaps one of his most valuable pieces of equipment were his ankle-mounted rocket boosters. It was one of the first units he added to his person. This would enable him to escape the Jedi, or find better positioning on a target. His rocket boots also had the added benefit of being magnetized, though this was only advantageous in very specific circumstances. With all these tools and gadgets, and Bane's skill to use them effectively against his targets, it's no wonder he was regarded as one of the best bounty hunters of the time. Xanatos came from a long line of lightsaber duelists: Qui-Gon Jinn, Count Dooku, and Thame Cerulean. His fighting prowess was coupled with his ability to scheme, as indicated in the Jedi Manual, which is further verified in the Jedi Apprentice books. He certainly didn't lose his touch with his Force abilities, but his true power came mostly from his mind games and his non-combative Force applications. The height of his powers were displayed in the Captive Temple, where he was able to cloak his Force signature from the entire Jedi Temple, even Yoda. Now, this does not necessarily mean his use of the Force was greater than that of the Jedi Counselors, but it does showcase his natural talent with the Force. Even so, he was merely a Dark Jedi, not a full-blown Sith, so abilities like Force Lightning and other Sith abilities were beyond his understanding and frankly, not of his interest. Though not a Sith, he still could employ Force Rage, bolstering his feats for strength and speed. He also employed telekinesis strategically, throwing tables against his former master, but he also displayed some high-level skill, briefly levitating himself in a pool of water. The Dark Jedi carried a very standard lightsaber of the time, swapping out his blue crystal for a red one when he renounced the Jedi way. During his time as a Jedi Initiate, he was a prodigy of the blade, top of his class, unmatched by any of his peers. Judging by his fighting style, Xanatos was likely a practitioner of Ataru, the fourth form of lightsaber combat, with some knowledge of his Jarkai variant, a dual blade adaptation. It is likely that Xanatos was taught Ataru from his former master, Qui-Gon Jinn, who himself favored the form, according to the Force Unleashed novelization. But much like his master, his form of Ataru was less about speed and more about strength, as his blows were very powerful. This could imply that his use of Ataru was more grounded, and the elements he incorporated were his use of the entire body as a weapon, as he frequently integrated kicks and punches into his lightsaber movesets. I would also argue that Xanatos had some proficiency with the second form of lightsaber combat, Mokashi. Qui-Gon noted that Xanatos fought with economy and grace, and his endurance was very sustainable, both of which were tenets of Mokashi. That being the case, Xanatos left a bit to be desired with his footwork, which was a fundamental of Form 2. This would mean that Xanatos, if he did practice the form, was merely intermediate at best, not for lack of skill, but for lack of training. Having said that, he was also ambidextrous, suggesting, perhaps, that he was highly skilled in his blade work, yet unrefined in his balance, which would make sense as, after all, he left the Jedi Order before he became a Jedi Knight, and by extension, honed his craft. And this is where the meat of the comparison comes in, a bounty hunter's equipment versus a Force user's talent. We have seen what makes a bounty hunter successful: keeping distance, staying away from blasters, and using explosives. Success for a Force user will be trusting in or abusing the Force, staying defensive, or blitzing with sheer speed or power. Between Cad Bane and Xanatos, which of these abilities are more likely to achieve victory? Cad Bane has faced off against some pretty tenacious Jedi. His blasters were designed to overwhelm their defenses, and if someone like Obi-Wan could not reflect his blaster bolts effectively, I doubt someone of Xanatos' level could do any better. And if Xanatos is able to close a distance, like any other Force sensitive, it would generally be game over for Bane. But the bounty hunter had several tricks, literally up his sleeves, that could balance the odds, whether it was his electrified gloves or his flame projector. In terms of pure combative skill in a straight-up bout, Bane could not hope to stand toe-to-toe with Xanatos, but his arsenal was designed to cope with everything Xanatos could throw at him. There is a chance of the Dark Jedi tagging Bane with debris or a straight telekinetic push, but I favor the bounty hunter's equipment against Xanatos' unfavorable balance and unrefined training. Where a Master Force user should be able to eventually deal with all of Cad Bane's distractions and gadgets, I have my doubts about Xanatos doing the same. Though he was a prodigy in his own right, his training was ultimately incomplete, and I believe his senses will be overwhelmed by Cad Bane's rapid-fire blasters, or his thermal detonators, or his darts. The former Jedi could certainly cope, but he would not have enough to control the situation. Cad Bane gets the edge for his equipment and skill. It's one thing to be equipped with dozens of weapons, and it's another thing to be skilled with said weapons, but it's a whole different thing on how one uses those items. Lucky enough for Cad Bane, he was a professional. The Clone Wars Encyclopedia states that Bane respected, but did not fear the power of the Jedi. In fact, he used their reliance on the Force against them, forcing them to be, quote, overconfident and careless. Funny enough, Darth Traya would say the same on Xanatos' homeworld of Telos 4.
Take the greatest Jedi Knight, strip away the Force, and what remains? They rely on it, depend on it, more than they know. Watch as one tries to hold a blaster, as they try to hold a lightsaber, and you will see nothing more than a woman, or a man, a child.
We have seen how Cad Bane has equalized himself with the Jedi, even taking on some of the best. Not just because of his toolset, but when he decided to use them. Bolas were used for distraction, his pistols were used to keep Jedi preoccupied, and his flame projector would be used to finish them off. And he always had the ability to fall back on his rocket boosters. Bane even trained himself against Jedi mind tricks, able to resist not one, not two, but 3 Jedi, including 2 council members and the chosen one of the Force. To me, this really indicates Bane's dedication to fight against Jedi, whether by way of his weapons or by way of his own mind. And this mindset carried over into his tactics when fighting them. He was willing to fight until the very end, even fight against Jedi toe-to-toe, never truly afraid of what a fell bounty would bring, but always respecting their power. Xanatos was a great tactician in his own right, but unlike Bane, he was more of a puppet master than a frontline mercenary. His strength was in planning and scheming. In direct confrontations he relied on, in my opinion, Dune Mach, the talent for psychological warfare. When fighting Obi-Wan Kenobi, he placed doubts in the young and impressionable Jedi Knight before attacking him, and he would do the same against Qui-Gon Jinn. But the Dark Jedi would be hard-pressed using this against Cad Bane, who was not easily intimidated nor manipulated, even with the aid of the Force. Xanatos' scheming nature adapts very well into his fighting style. When fighting his former master, instead of meeting him head-on, he attempted to use tables and view screens to unbalance his opponent. This was even indicated when he was a Padawan. When fighting Qui-Gon in a sparring session, he blocked low to open his master's left side, a simple tactic, but a fundamental one for someone who was partial to bluffing. His power with Force Cloak also infers a preference for deception rather than a head-on engagement. But when all of his ruses fell, he did not have much to fall back on, and as indicated in the Jedi Manual, he would rather flee to the nearest escape pod and live to plot another day. Or in other words, Xanatos knew that he was not truly a fighter, and can certainly be outclassed, so he always made sure to have a, quote, back door, as he would say during the captive temple. Xanatos' use of smoke screens and deceit lightly worked on those like young Obi-Wan Kenobi, but against someone like Cad Bane, his trash talk would fall on deaf ears, and his distractions would be no more annoying than a fruit fly. One could argue that Xanatos was a superior strategist in terms of the way he could delegate, but even that is not ensured, as Cad Bane has put together jobs that required multiple pieces. And when looking purely at a head-on assault, as we are now, Cad Bane has a bit of a leg up. In a way, Xanatos is the type of Force user that Bane prides himself on defeating, a Force user who is overconfident in their abilities and too sure of their superiority, whether well-founded or not. I favor Cad Bane's ability to overwhelm Xanatos over the Dark Jedi's ability to do the same to the bounty hunter. I find it more likely for Cad Bane to continue pressing on, while Xanatos looks for an exit. Cad Bane gets the edge for his combative and tactical abilities. The reason I chose Cad Bane to square off against Xanatos is because of 1, their shared history infiltrating the Jedi Temple, but more so, because there has been a lot of contention between non-Force sensitives and Force sensitives. So if Cad Bane and Xanatos were to meet in a straight-up fight, who would win? Let's set up this fight. Let's say it takes place outside of Maskanata's castle. The destroyed version. The following is a hypothetical explanation of these possible outcomes. First, let's examine the early fight. I would say that Cad Bane would attack first, as it would prevent him from being outright dominated by Xanatos' force powers, whether by way of a force push or otherwise. Xanatos, using his Jedi reflexes, would draw his Crimson Blade, turning away Bane's initial assault, but I doubt that any of the reflected bolts would find their target. Cad Bane would likely maneuver around with his rocket boots, giving Xanatos a respectable gap. Much of this early fight would be much of the same, with Cad Bane gauging how advanced Xanatos' abilities were, and Xanatos attempting to successfully redirect the bounty hunter's blaster bolts. Within the exchange, Xanatos might even try to cast doubt on Bane's abilities, or mock his chances of survival. Obviously, this would not diminish Bane's effectiveness, and I can see this early fight ending with a successful bola throw, or a cable launcher tie-up. Of course, there is a chance for the Dark Jedi to sense such an attack, and leap away from the bola, or intercept the cable with his lightsaber. But overall, I favor Cad Bane for a 2-to-1 advantage in the early fight. More often than not, the fight would extend into the mid-range game. It will become obvious to Xanatos that he would need to close the distance to occupy any kind of advantage. Slowly he would make his way to Bane, turning each blaster bolt away, dodging each bola, and utilizing Atario to exert his force-augmented physicality, attempting to blitz the bounty hunter. And it may very well be the case that he could do this, breaching Cad Bane's defensive bubble by way of a telekinetic push, or a simple leap, grabbing Bane's leg. But Bane would have his bases covered, knowing that if Xanatos did get within lightsaber range, he would use his gas or his electric gauntlets before a killing blow could slice him in two. And that's where I see this portion of the fight leading a majority of the time. Cad Bane could open with a gas attack, nullifying Xanatos' Ataru assault, then follow up with an electric shock, ending the affair by way of a thermal detonator, a toxic dart to the neck, or a blaster bolt through the heart. But of course, whenever there's a Jedi involved, there is a chance that Bane could simply be speed blitzed, too slow for Xanatos' superior physicality. Though considering that Bane could at least contend with most Jedi, I do find this less likely, and I favor Cad Bane for a 3-to-2 advantage in the mid-fight. If Xanatos does manage to fight through the pain of the tear gas, or simply power through an electric shock, I think his mindset would change from fight to flight. At this point, he would simply look for a way to escape and reassess the situation. He may even try to desperately throw rubble against Cad Bane, looking for a way to flee. But I find it more likely for Bane to finish the job before something like this could successfully occur. In the late fight, I favor Cad Bane for a 2-to-0 advantage, with Xanatos not earning any edge because his only successful play at this point would be to retreat. And even if he's successful in doing this, it would not exactly earn him a victory point in this fight. Much like Xanatos' final fight with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, he would try to make a getaway, but if his back was against the wall, he wouldn't want to be taken in. Therefore, Cad Bane's overall advantage would be a 7 out of 10 majority. Of all the scenarios, I believe this matchup would end somewhere between the mid and late fight. Xanatos will start off confident, attempting to break down Cad Bane's courage, but when this does nothing, I believe the Dark Jedi would attempt to assert his own physical dominance, which will be met with a brick wall, and that brick wall would be a face full of gas, a thermal detonator, or a plume of flames. I do not find it likely for Xanatos to recover, giving him no option for escape. And Cad Bane would end the engagement with a blaster bolt through the former Jedi's heart. And in conclusion, I declare Cad Bane, the cowboy bounty hunter, the Jedi hunter, the victor. Of course, this is all my opinion, based on my interpretation of the lore. Do you agree that Cad Bane would take a majority against Xanatos? Or do you believe that Qui-Gon's former student is more likely the victor? Let me know in the comments below. And special thanks to Darth Will 3 for pointing out the bounty hunter's code in a previous comment. It was very helpful for this video. And of course, peace, love, and may the Force be with you. Always.
I just really wanted to show how deadly the weapon could be.
Time periods. Through strife and turmoil, they both led successful careers, becoming the best bounty hunters of the Old Republic and the Galactic Empire, respectively.
The dark side.
Like this guy, what is he doing? Stop shooting at me. I'm a lightsaber wielding foe. Don't.
Let's say it takes place outside of Maskanata's. Let's say it takes place outside of Maskanata's. Let's say it takes place outside of Maskanata's cat. Let's say it takes place outside of Maskanata's. Let's say it takes place outside of Maskanata's castle. Oh my god. Let's say it takes place outside of Maskanata's Maskanata. Let's say it takes place outside of Maskanata's. The reason that we feel that our flag was still there. To the home of the brave. That's why I don't sing, guys, because I am a terrible singer and I am tone deaf. All right, let's get to it.